This is going to be completely seamless here. Is Aaron the highlighted one?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Let's bring him on. Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Kleinman. He is the director of research at Future Now and at GiveSmart. And he's also, what is it, Bobby Big Wheel on Twitter?
Yeah, I chose that as my Deadspin username about 12 years ago, and it's kind of stuck.
There you go. Welcome back to the program, Aaron. So I want to talk about your the thing that you guys have put out. Where is it? The State of the States report. I want to talk about that in a moment, but let's go over what happened yesterday, because big deal, right? I mean, so big deal yesterday.
It was. And in the primaries yesterday, you saw, real patterns emerge in the Democratic and Republican primaries. In the Democratic primaries, what you really saw was that the primary voters want to see a sense of urgency. Democratic primary voters have by and large been marching in the streets, shoulder to shoulder, for the past few months, demanding a better life. And if they don't see a politician as either standing shoulder to shoulder with them, or as at the very least not sensing that same sense of urgency as them, then they will vote against them. And I think obviously Cori Bush beating Lacey Clay was probably the biggest example of that. But, I've been on this show before, and we've been talking about, this has been going on in Democratic legislative primaries in so many states, Pennsylvania, New York, New Mexico, for the past few months. It's a nationwide phenomenon that's happening where Democratic primary voters really expect that their representatives to deliver for them and feel the same sense of urgency as them. And then, go ahead. Yeah, and then on the other hand, you have Republican primaries. And so the biggest profile one was the Kansas Senate race, but that's kind of an outlier. If you look at everything, and, it's also, this multi-million-dollar thing where the national parties are involved, and, that can kind of distort things a bit. But what we saw, there are three states that had primaries today where we're really involved, and that would be Michigan, Kansas, and Arizona. In Michigan, you saw Republicans turn back well-funded, kind of DeVos-backed candidates in primaries for people who were really involved in like the reopen protests in Michigan, if you remember those back in April, really kind of like fringe right-winger, storming the state capitol with assault weapons type stuff. In Kansas, you saw a lot of moderates in suburban districts lose their primaries to conservatives, and really, it will make it much easier for Democrats to break the Republican supermajority in that state. And then in Arizona, you had two really kind of like swingy state Senate districts where Republicans nominated QAnon believers. And so on the Republican side, you're kind of seeing Trump, the party is increasingly looking like Trump. And I think there's a lot of talk about what happens to the Republican Party after Trump, whenever that happens. And I mean, he has made permanent changes to the party, and it reflects him now.
Well, first off, let me just say that I've been here before, and I'm going to recognize that and just put down that marker. But I'm also going to say that this is not a function of Trump. This is, it seems to me, the natural progression of the Republican Party. Trump is a function of the natural progression of the Republican Party. It doesn't work the other way, it seems to me. Like this.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, obviously the party has basically, as it has become increasingly in hock to special interests, it has a kind of less and less appealing actual policy program. So it's had to lean more and more into nationalism, which is kind of how you end up with Trump and basically his band of cronies looting the federal government, and how the Republican Party just goes along with it. And so, yeah, you're right that he's basically left the party with that. And I think, when I come back to Trump and kind of his permanent effect on it, it's really just like the conspiracy fringe stuff of it, where, that really has, like the whole QAnon thing to me is, it really is shocking just how quickly that has taken hold in really mainstream Republican politics. And I think that is something that you can attribute to Trump.
Maybe, but also I would say in 1988, you had Rush Limbaugh talking about Hillary Clinton murdering Vince Foster and dragging his body into the park. I mean, even pre-Trump, I remember specifically, I bet you Matt, and I don't know if Brendan was around at the time, but Dana Loesch, when she was doing her NRA TV, she had on, I just remember this moment, Ajit Pai, I think it was. Was that the guy? Is he the guy who was the FCC?
Reese's mug guy, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So when Ajit Pai was on there and they were talking about net neutrality, so this must have been 14, I can't remember when it was. She said to him in the course of a conversation, I'm surprised you haven't been Vince Fostered. That's it. That's all she said.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you haven't been Vince Fostered. And I asked these guys in the office, I'm like, do you have any idea what that means? So I had no idea whatsoever. And I had to explain to them the whole thing about like, they think that Hillary Clinton killed Vince Foster and dragged his body into the park. And like, if she can say that on a radio show with the confidence that her audience is going to know what she's talking about in 2014, fully 25 years after the fact that Vince Foster died, maybe 21 years. There was a big strain of this in the party. Now, Donald Trump may have accelerated a little bit, and I don't want to get caught up on this point, but I just, this is the trajectory the Republican Party has been on. Trump may have bent the curve a little bit upwards or accelerated it, but it's fascinating.
That's fair. But I mean, it really, it shows you that there's just very little resistance to that left anymore. Whereas, I would say, listen, nobody in the Republican Party of the past 20 years was certainly trying to stop making fools of yourself and going on Limbaugh. No, they'd go along with it. But now it's, they're getting high off their own supply, basically. And, the supposed adults in the room all actually think that, John Podesta is running a child sex trafficking ring out of the basement of a DC pizza restaurant.
Correct.
And so without, like, there's just no guardrails left. And so that's kind of how you have, basically this fringe taking over the party.
Okay. So that's happening on the right. And we're going to see, presumably we're going to see more of this, and that there may be just an inability at this point to push, to beat that back on some level, going down the road. We will see. Let me ask you this one dynamic, okay, that's sort of tied into that notion that the Republican Party continues to sort of like head towards the margins. Saw these some of these stats from that guy Wasserman on Twitter. In 2016, suburban St. Louis County voted 55% to 39% for Hillary Clinton. 2018, it voted 62% to 36% for Claire McCaskill. She ended up losing anyways, but in 2020, it voted 73 to 27% to expand Medicaid. Are we seeing like how does that story relate to the QAnon story, or does it? Like, how much of a danger is there that we are getting what's going on there? Is that the PMCs are moving to the left, or is it that, or what?
I think that's exactly it. And, I think, part polarization in ideology, it's not kind of a one-way street. It's a constant feedback loop. And so, when Donald Trump polarizes, you mentioned a suburban county in Missouri, for example, he has polarized, many of the kind of, formerly maybe Mitt Romney voters, minivan driving, well-off professionals who, kind of don't want radical change, but, they certainly don't believe, again, that, Vince Foster was dragged into a park after Hillary Clinton secretly murdered him. And so, Donald Trump drives those people away from the Republican Party because he's so anathema to kind of, their belief to kind of, he's crass, vulgar. He really kind of shows kind of this ugly nativism that they thought that they were above. But when he does that, they also kind of, because of the nature of the two-party system, they're driven to the Democratic Party. And basically, in order to kind of fit in order to oppose Donald Trump, they also adopt the policy positions of the Democratic Party as well. And it's not something that just kind of happens right away. It's something that, it's a gradual process. But I think, a lot of the fears that I think some people on the left had of, the fact that the party is, moving to is moving to its strength in the suburbs, that means they'll move to the right. Well, no, that hasn't really happened. And then again, if you go back to our report, you'll see that a lot of these big, battlegrounds, in 2020 in the election, they, especially in like state legislative races as well, they really tend to be in suburbs, and the candidates running there are not like pro-austerity Mitt Romney types. I mean, they want to make it so that people can have affordable health care and good schools and clean water, things that, the Democratic Party, has really stood for in the past to help improve people's lives.
Okay, so let's turn to that report. And is your report that you put out? I guess you put it out the end of July. Is it available to anybody?
It's available to anyone who wants it. It's on futurenow.org, our website. You can also follow me on Twitter, Bobby Bigwheel. I have it as my pinned tweet. Whatever is easiest for you. We just want you to download it and read it. It's for anyone to look through. That I find a little bit annoying because I thought like I was getting like a special report that would make me seem smarter about this stuff. The sneak preview thing. Oh, all right. Well, all right. I guess that's something. But so in general, I mean, there's you basically look at how the electorate largely has changed in terms of demographics. You look at who within the electorate has changed. You look at what the impact of COVID and the George Floyd protest make. You also talk about the third party vote, and then you talk about the disco stew fallacy, which I did not know what that was, but I do know now, which is that when I don't know who Stu was, but at one point it looked like disco records were, had shot up to the charts in 1976. And if this trend holds, there's going to be nothing but disco. And disco was a bit of a blip. Yeah. So exactly. What trends are holding? Like, is the QAnon trend going to hold? Like, what trends are holding, A, broadly speaking, in terms of the electorate, and B, what's going to happen in these? What are the key states to be looking at in terms of state elections, and where are they trending? Yeah. So I think, we look at kind of the 2012, 2016 trends, and we see, oh my God, Democrats are losing white working class voters in droves. They're just going to keep leaving the Democratic Party. They really just need to kind of max out college educated voters and non-white voters as well. And, a lot of people have assumed that trend would hold. But what we actually have seen was in the 2018 midterms, Democrats' biggest gain among any demographic group was actually among white working class voters. And their biggest gains geographically came in rural areas. Now, what does that mean in practice? It means that, rural areas would have gone from, voting maybe 35% for Clinton to maybe 42% or something for another Democrat. But, in a statewide election, that's a huge difference. If, one thing I like to say is if Joe Biden gets Hillary Clinton's margins in the suburbs and John Kerry's margins in rural areas, he's winning in a landslide. But another trend that people, kind of assume will hold, but we touched on the report that really isn't, is Republicans keep making inroads among non-white voters, especially younger male non-white voters. And so when you're looking at kind of how does that manifest itself? And so, obviously there's, when we're looking at the battlefield, I think, states like Iowa, for example, or Montana, or even Texas, which we're in, there's so much room for growth for Democrats in areas that you might not think. And that, again, a state like Iowa, if Joe Biden ends up disproportionately improving his standing with white voters, it's going to be in the middle of the pack of swing states. And so, don't assume that all these past trends are going to kind of constantly hold, and look at kind of broadly where the opportunities are for Democrats. And they're not all just kind of upscale suburbs. They might be in places like Benton Harbor, Michigan, or Muscatine, Iowa, or, Flagstaff, Arizona. And so, again, I want to make sure that people keep an open mind, that we don't quite know where exactly the closest races are going to be, but we kind of need to prepare for a wide range of outcomes and make sure that the Democrats in all those races are fully resourced.
Well, I just want to touch on the thing you said, that the Republicans are making inroads with men of color ages 18 to 24. Is that what you said?
Not necessarily. I mean, I would say younger, so I mean maybe under like 40 or so. We've seen it. It's a trend that's been manifesting itself. There are a lot of different theories about it. Whether it's kind of, I think broadly it kind of ties, to institutions in those communities, in some communities like the Church for African Americans, for example, is losing power. And that has really been a pillar of Democratic strength in the past, and so that could be leading to some of it.
Now, when you say men of color, like when you say men of color, are we talking black people? Are we talking?
I would say black, Latino. I haven't seen as many surveys of Asian or Native American. But broadly, we have seen among, non-white voters as a whole, just Democrats are not achieving their Obama era margins among them. And again, those were very high margins, and it's hard to kind of keep that going forever.
Right.
It's just kind of, again, it's the nature of, don't assume that all these past trends will hold. And it is a dynamic, the electors are kind of this dynamic, kind of tough to discern sometimes thing. And again, the real main takeaway is that we have to be mindful that there's a broad array of potential areas where we can, win state legislative seats and improve people's lives through state legislative seats, that, this election should really be seen as a big opportunity in that regard.
I know your whole pitch is that if you want your dollar to pack as much punch as possible, you should be looking at state races.
Yeah.
Here's an opportunity. Give me 3 states and or races that if, I came to you and I said, Aaron, I want my dollar to make the biggest difference possibly politically, who should I give it to? Like, what race do I want to contribute to that is going to flip a seat in a state, that will flip a legislator, that will get people Medicaid, that will protect a woman's right to choose, that will allow for a higher minimum wage, and that, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, so I'm happy to give you 3. So 3, I think, of the really top ones are Arizona. Arizona, we are basically 2 seats shy of flipping the Senate, 1 of flipping the House there. You get a Democratic legislature there. That's been a site of really big education, funding protests. I would say North Carolina, where we're so close in the state house there. That's a state where narrow special interests led by this billionaire Art Pope really wreaked havoc on that state's infrastructure. And Montana, a state that a lot of people don't necessarily think of as a swing state, but it's also a state where it's really cheap, where you have a lot of great Democratic candidates, and where if Democrats can flip the House there, they can really make big strides in that state. And actually, in a few weeks, we'll be launching our Give Smart program. So keep your eyes out for that. Again, I'll be futurenow.org or Bobby Big Wheel on Twitter. You can find it through either of those venues. And that's where we will actually be giving you maybe right now we're thinking the top 8 races at that moment where your dollar will go the furthest across the states where the campaign finance rules make it so that small donors make the biggest difference. And we really want to make sure that, if you want to make the biggest difference in, whatever state legislative race is possible, we want to be able to give you the places where really at that moment the small donors make the biggest difference.
Aaron Kleinman, always a pleasure. Future Now, check it out. People can go and find that report that you made, and we'll keep an eye out for the Give Smart recommendations.
All right.
Despite
Thanks so much, Sam.
Despite the disco stew fallacy, my projection of the value of you appearing on this show has been unwavering. So I'm glad to say.
I swear that's not a fallacy.
No. All right. Thanks. I appreciate it. Take it easy. Bye.
Thanks so much, Sam.